We had a bit of a change to our session today. One of our panelists is unable to join, but thankfully we still have one alumna who is able to speak with us about her U.S. university experience, and we'll introduce her shortly. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Education USA. We are a Department of State network of advising centers around the world. And here in Doha, we're based at the U.S. Embassy. And what we do is we offer guidance to international students who are interested in studying in the United States, either undergraduate or graduate students. So if you have any questions about U.S. higher education or would like to schedule a one-on-one advising appointment, we'd love to hear from you, and we'll put our contact information in the chat box during the session. And now I'll turn it over to Hensa Maria, our wonderful moderator for today's session.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. We're super excited about this session to hear from a wonderful woman who studied in the United States at Harvard Law College. Thank you, Miranda, for joining us. We're excited to hear from you, and we look forward to listening to your stories and learning about your experience so that hopefully more people can apply and experience this for themselves. So our first question.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Our first question is, how did you think of applying to the US? And specifically for law, people, usually think about the UK or even just staying in Qatar. So what did this transition look like for you?
I actually did my undergraduate studies in the UK. And so for me, I had done that experience, and Harvard Law School has been a dream of mine since I was in high school. And I did not get in the first time I applied. I actually applied twice before I was admitted the third time. And so it took quite a bit of perseverance and accumulating work experience and gaining the New York bar in the meantime and using the time. But it was a dream, and alhamdulillah, with the grace of God, it actually came true.
Wow, that's an amazing journey, because often we're scared of applying to universities precisely because we don't want to get rejected, or sometimes we don't think we're going to get in, and so it's amazing to see that you've gone through the entire experience, and yet your dream or your persistence was sort of strong enough to keep you going, to keep you applying. So can you talk us through the application process? Can you tell us a little about your experience with the application itself? What did you do differently the next time that you ended up applying? Perhaps that will be helpful to our new applicants.
Of course, happily. So the application process for Harvard Law School in particular, and I applied to several other law schools at the same time, and it was very essay-based, where there were a lot of personal questions and questions about your experience, your background, what makes you a good fit for the school, and also future forward-looking questions of how you intend to make the best use of your degree, what is the vision that you have for your life, and I guess with those types of questions, the schools are trying to select those students that would be able to benefit the most and benefit as many people as possible from gaining a degree in those schools. And the thing that I did differently, and the biggest thing that I did differently, I think, between applications was understand that it wasn't a personal rejection. It's not that Miranda is not good enough. It's that other students are excellent and they have something which perhaps I don't yet, but it doesn't mean that I can't get there. And so in between each application, what I did was assess what can I do to better myself professionally, and at the same time give me a higher chance of getting in when I next applied. And so I applied for a job. I started working at a US law firm in their Doha-based office. And I also studied for the New York bar independently, and took that and became a qualified New York lawyer in between the time when I finished studying my undergraduate degree in the UK and actually ended up going to the US. So all of those things would have put me would have benefited me even if I hadn't been thinking of how do I make my application better. They're all things that professionally took me forward. And so, and a very big added bonus was that it also showed my perseverance and showed how hard I can work, and I guess ended up working in my favor.
So really, you kept on working towards your dream, and you did other things besides just thinking about applying again, and you continued your professional journey. Just a question: did you have to take any standardized tests, or do you have any tips for anyone who might be applying or who might be thinking of applying?
Of course. So I did not have to take any standardized test for two reasons. The first is because I didn't have to take any English proficiency exams because my undergraduate degree was in the UK. And so I was exempt from those. Had it been done in a non-English speaking country, I think I probably would have had to take an English proficiency exam. And the LSAT is a standardized test that is required in law schools, but it's required for Juris Doctorate JD degrees, and I was applying for an LLM. And so I did not have to take the LSAT. I've taken the TOEFL before when I was applying for undergraduate degrees in the US, but I ended up going to the UK instead. And that was over 10 years ago, which makes me feel a bit old.
Okay, that's really helpful advice. So really, everyone has to look at their specific qualifications, where they're coming from, what their degrees look like, and what the requirements are. So there isn't any specific test that we can really point them to, which will guarantee them an admission if they get good marks. So after this persistence, when you finally went to the US, when you finally went to Harvard Law School, what was it like for you? How did that feel? Perhaps describe your first memory for us, or your most memorable experience.
I remember getting there and being blown away by the campus, and just thinking that I felt like I was in a movie. And of course, I was really excited to be there. I remember very, very clearly the first day of orientation. The dean, Dean Minow at the time of the law school, asked everyone in the audience, all of the new law students, both JD and LLM, there are about 600 or 700 people in the audience, who feels like they were accepted by accident, who feels like they don't belong, who feels like they're not good enough to be in here. And my hand just automatically shot up. And the topic of that discussion was imposter syndrome. And that is definitely something that I have felt and struggled with throughout. And I was very happy that it was acknowledged, and it was my first experience within the law school of, you're not strange for thinking this way. Everyone around you feels the same, and you all deserve to be here.
I can imagine how glad you must have felt, and how validated your feelings must have felt that moment when they acknowledged it, because obviously you put in a lot of hard work, but you pray for it and you work for it, but you don't really think about the other side of it. So I'm really glad that you got to have that experience. Can you tell us a little about your classrooms, your professors, your peers? What was that experience like?
Of course. So the LLM degree itself, there were about 180 students in my year group from about 85 different countries. And so it was very, very multinational and diverse, and it was wonderful. We had people with us who were judges, and we had people with us who had never worked before. So there was diversity in culture, in background, in work experience, in age, in every way. And that was really nice to have. It was a very enriching experience. Also, I did the LLM with a concentration in international human rights with a specific focus upon immigration. And so I did a lot of clinical work with the Human Rights Clinic and the Immigration Clinic with asylum seekers and refugees within the US. And that was also a very fulfilling experience, because not only did I have the classroom experience, which was wonderful, and gaining the knowledge of both the unbelievable professors that were there and also the students, but also having that practical hands-on work and client work and getting that experience and exposure. And so I feel it was a very well-rounded year. And it was also fascinating in that I have certain interests as well, and the course, the curriculum was so diverse, and there were so many different courses to choose from that you could really dive into other interests that you had beyond law. I have a passion for psychology, for example, and there were a lot of law and psychology, law and neuroscience classes in collaboration between the med school and the law school, and across registration. So half the class would be law students and the other half would be medical students. And I just really enjoyed how flexible the curriculum was and how interesting the courses were.
So it sounds like a very multi-dimensional experience. You didn't just go to class, study law, and come back. You made, friends from different parts of the world. You were with people from everywhere, professors from everywhere, and took all kinds of classes in everything that you were interested in. Can you tell us a little about any clubs that you may have joined, or any co-curricular activities that you, became a part of? And what was that experience like?
Of course, outside of the university, every time I've lived somewhere, something I try to do is separate from whichever university I'm in or whichever job that I'm in. I join local volunteering places. And so I volunteered with like homeless shelters and soup kitchens, separate from the university, to expose myself to the wider community as well, and to get to know people who are from outside of the Harvard bubble. And then within the Harvard Law School itself, the only society that I joined was the Islamic Society, and I absolutely adored being part of that club. It was a very it was a beautiful group of people in every way. It felt like a home away from home, having people that understood and shared, alhamdulillah, my faith. And we took a trip together and we went to Cape Cod, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was the middle of winter, but it was still gorgeous to have that time with those girls and just really bond and share and develop our friendships. And then I'm trying to think, there were activities and clubs and talks that we would do and host and get involved with, but it was more getting to know people. And actually the interesting thing is that it wasn't limited to just Muslims. Everyone who was open to join, everyone was welcome. And there were there were people who were curious who joined, and alhamdulillah, it was a great group. It is a great group, and that's the only university-based group that I joined.
So you had a lot of diverse experiences, and you really immersed yourself within the community in general. And I think it's good to have these diverse experiences where you aren't just restricted. I think really gives you the importance of having that cultural experiences, that cultural experience, the feel of living in a new city. So now for the $1,000,000 question. How did you make friends? What was that process like? Were you easily able to find people like you? I know you've mentioned a little about the Muslim Students Association, or the Islamic Society. Can you tell us a little about that? Because I know when I moved to Qatar for my undergrad to Georgetown, and now as I move for grad school, that's always been one of my biggest worries. Like, how do you make friends? How do you find your crowd, so to say?
I have to say, and it's easier when you're younger. I don't know if that is a personal thing or if that's just a general thing. It was definitely easier at 18 than it was at 25. In my undergraduate degree, I found it easier to make friends. However, again, it wasn't difficult. That being said, it was not difficult to make friends. It just took a little bit more of putting yourself out there and, introducing yourself to people and just getting to know people. And with that mentality in mind, and like the confidence to go up to people and just say, hello, my name's Miranda, like, and talk to people in class. It wasn't difficult. It was, alhamdulillah, easy to make friends. And my group was, again, like representative of the diversity within the class. There are people from absolutely every part of the world. And the beautiful thing about post-university life as well is that we've remained in close contact. We've remained very good friends, and we have traveled to pre-COVID, traveled to visit each other for weddings and occasions. And, it's taken us to those friendships that I made have taken me to a wedding in Guatemala, and for a classmate, and reunions all over the globe. And it's a beautiful thing.
Okay, that's such a relief to hear. Not that nervous anymore. Thank you for that. So my next question is about some of the cultural differences that you may have noticed, or your best memory, about those cultural differences or your cultural experience within the United States, which is interesting, especially because you mentioned that you spent a lot of times doing activities that weren't necessarily a part of the Harvard bubble, so to say.
So culturally, I have to say that Boston is a very educated and a very diverse place as well, and cosmopolitan. And so culturally, it was easy to fit. I've also lived in New York, not as a student, and I've loved that experience as well, just because of how open it was. Alhamdulillah, something that I was fearing but never experienced, I was apprehensive about before going but didn't experience, was Islamophobia and racism. But alhamdulillah, that was not my experience. Not to negate it for anyone or to say it doesn't exist. I think it can exist everywhere, but it was not something that I experienced.
Okay, can you tell us a little about some of the advantages that you noticed that you got when you studied in the US, and also some disadvantages?
I think everything we've been talking about the diversity of the experience, and just how specific to my course and my degree, just how much of it was you could tailor to your own interests and your own passions. That was something that felt very unique to, I'm not sure if it's unique to Harvard or to the US experience in general, but I definitely liked that. I'm trying to think. I had made some notes prior to the talk, and I'm just trying to see if there's anything I hadn't touched on. So a challenge I faced, just to go to that, a challenge I faced which I hadn't considered prior to going was actually prayer areas, because I have grown up in Qatar and grew accustomed to never having that issue or facing that issue. And the campus is huge, and I chose to live off campus. And so I couldn't go home in between classes. And so that was a note that I made of, that was something that there were so many challenges that I was apprehensive about before going, and they didn't materialize. And some of the things that I hadn't even considered, and they cropped up. But you find a solution and make do with everything. And I think, as with anything in life, it's the attitude that you approach things with, of whether this is going to be a challenge or just something that you figure out.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that there are always unforeseen challenges, and I think regardless of where you are, what part of the world it is, and who you are, you will definitely end up facing some challenges, and it's just up to you to find your solution or your workaround. We touched on this a little earlier. You spoke about how you were lucky enough to not experience any, Islamophobic incidents or things like that, but generally we know that student safety is one of the major concerns every time someone thinks about applying to the US. So, can you tell us a little about if whether you had to face any safety concerns, or how safe did you feel? What was that part of it like? I'm sure your parents must have thought about these things when they were, or your family must have been concerned about them, and you must have been concerned about them.
Of course, and also bearing in mind that the years that I had gone, they were a very politically charged years. I was there from 2014 to 15, the start of the Black Lives Matter movement, and for the Ferguson trials and all the rest of it. And not to say that that made me feel any more or less safe, just to set the scene of the parental concerns as well before going. But I think, as with everything, it comes down to common sense. I felt safe because I made sure that I wasn't walking alone after dark. I was very careful about where I go. I have a personal alarm that I carry with me at all times, and taking, those precautions in mind. And it doesn't matter wherever I am in the world, those are just standard things that rules that I live by personally. And I think it comes down to that a lot of the time. That being said, I did have a close friend who experienced something while I was there, and it's completely unfair to say people put themselves in dangerous situations. That was not the case at all, and that's not an excuse. And so I'm not saying that, just walking during the day or carrying an alarm is prevention to everything, but it's just exercising common sense, trying to be
Absolutely.
to be safe. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's good to have your precautions, and it's good to have your support network and your way of dealing with things, as opposed to just sitting and waiting for, God
And
forbid, something to happen. Yeah, go ahead.
and being very careful also when selecting accommodation. If whoever elects to live off campus, making sure that they're living somewhere that they would feel safe walking to and from alone.
Definitely, a very important thing to keep in mind. So, when you were living in the US and you mentioned all these diverse friends that you had from everywhere, basically, um, were you able to network with a lot of Qataris as well? Were you able to find a Qatari community there? Were you able to network from students within the Middle East, or was it not a part of your experience?
It was. While I was at Harvard Law School, there were no other Qataris at the law school itself, but there were two other Qataris that I was friends with who were at Harvard at the time, and one of them, actually, me and her lived in the same building. So it was wonderful, and we got to know each other well, and that was fun. There were also students from other parts of the Middle East, and yeah, it's just like anywhere. You're attracted to the people that are good and fun and that you get along with, and be that Qataris or non-Qataris,
Absolutely. I'm glad you were able to find people from your community or people who you felt close with, because I know for me as an international student studying in Qatar, it was while I had a lot of friends from everywhere in the world, it was nice to just have people from my community or my country. Um, you know, sometimes if my mom needed to send something, or like, she could just call upon them and be like, okay, you're traveling, take this to my daughter. But yeah, just generally, that was a really helpful experience. Do you have any tips for any students who might be planning to apply to Harvard Law School or any other place?
If you don't like the cold, don't go to Boston. No, all jokes aside, my tip would be to make the most of the experience. Do the research before going. Have an idea of what it is that you would like to be involved with and be exposed to, but also keep an open mind. And as you come across clubs and and organizations that pique your interest, the yes challenge is always something that I think is great and very eye-opening. Of as long as it's something that you're curious about, just say yes.
Okay, I will definitely keep that in mind, and I am sure our audience will as well. One last question before we open it up to the audience. My question is, so when you came back from Harvard to Qatar, how did your experience in the US help you? What were some of the main things that it helped you with? And, as you reflect on it, do you have any specific emotions when you think back of it, on it, or like any specific skills that you learned from it?
I think the networking definitely helped. I was one of the on the younger side of my class, and being exposed to such a diverse class and interacting with people that were, in some instances, had children my age, and we were in a classroom together, and it made me a lot more comfortable of sitting in a meeting room and being able to confidently share my views with people that were a lot different, a lot older, a lot from diverse backgrounds. I think I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was. I think living alone in general, and becoming self-reliant, that is always a life skill that's important to have, and that was helpful to have. Yeah, I'm grateful for the experience.
I can definitely second that living alone part. You don't realize how many things you have to think about till you actually live on your own. And I think it really, really helps you become a well rounded individual after getting this experience. Thank you so much for joining us, Miran. Before we finish for today, Paula, do we have any questions from our audience?
No, actually, we don't have any questions, but I just have a couple of things. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit. I really appreciate that you mentioned the importance, I think, of getting involved, not just making it all about academics. I think, especially for adjusting to living in the United States, to help combat that kind of loneliness and, helping you to meet other people. Did you have an opportunity to travel outside of Boston?
I went to Chicago with a friend of mine when we had spring break, and I'm trying to think if there are any other trips. And I went to Cape Cod with the Islamic Society for a weekend. Those were the two trips outside.
Okay, so hopefully you got to experience some warmer.
Neither trip was warm.
Neither trip was warm.
I think that year it was one of the highest recorded snowfalls as well. And coming from the desert, it was just my luck, but just another anecdote.
No, it is, and that is one of the things, that when we're advising students, we do ask them to consider the location, especially when you're coming from such a warm climate. There's a bit of an adjustment. What about food? How did you find the food in the United States?
So I wasn't accustomed to the large portions, and I think that was a thing that took some getting used to, but I really enjoy cooking, and so I cooked a lot for myself. The food is wonderful in the US, but I think it would have been very easy to just eat out all the time and not make enough time, like immerse myself in studying and not have as much physical activity and just expand. So I'm glad I
Yeah. So you said you focused on Harvard, but were there any other law schools that you were looking at, or that was your dream?
So Harvard was one that I really wanted. Columbia was actually my first choice and my first dream, and I kept applying to both in parallel. I didn't get into Columbia, and a large part of why I wanted to go there was to live in New York. And luckily, a few years later, I got the opportunity to go and work in New York, and I'm so grateful. I really think that God chooses the best path at the best time, and I'm very happy with how everything turned.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in New York?
Of course. I was there for just under a year. I was on an international visiting attorney program with a large New York law firm called Skadden Arps, Slate Mayer and Flom. And it was a wonderful year, but a lot of hard work, a lot of very long hours, some nights spent sleeping in the office. And typical corporate associate New York lawyer life, but at the same time it was a very interesting, fun group of people. I made a lot of friends, and there was always something to do in New York. And so as hard as it was professionally, it was just as fun, if not more.
Okay, so you really enjoyed the living in the big city and experiencing that. So now you're practicing. Can you explain a little bit about the kind of law that you're practicing now in Qatar?
Of course. I'm a corporate commercial lawyer, and I've worked both in-house and in private practice, so in law firms and in companies. Right now, I'm working at North Oil Company in Qatar. It's a joint venture between Qatar Petroleum and Total. And previously, I was working at Al Jazeera Media Network and at Esquire Patent Box as well.
Oh, sounds like you're very busy. And any thoughts about continuing your studies?
Not at the moment.
Mhm.
Right now, I'm very happy to be practicing law. I always think a PhD is something that I might be interested in further down the line, but for now, I'm very happy to be practicing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mira. It's just been wonderful to hear your story and your willingness to share.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I'll let Hansa wrap it up for us.
Thank you for joining us. It was really enjoyable listening to your experiences because I'm going to start grad school soon. So I,
Good luck.
appreciate the advice. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience, whether they are listening to us right now or whether you're joining us, whenever you're free and listening to this on Facebook or wherever. Keep following the US Embassy's social media channels because we have a lot more content like this coming in. So make sure to, keep yourself updated. And thank you once again for joining us, Miranda.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and good luck with your studies, Hansa. You'll do great.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Hansa. Take care.